Okay, this is going to be my guide on Deimos handkiting. I'm going to be going through specifically what pet to choose, what your synergies are for traits, the differences in your gear and what that means for your toughness, how to maintain your boons like regeneration and protection, and then how to stack hands. So first off, you definitely want to be using the Black Bear as it gives you two immunity options, one being Unflinching Fortified that I'm showing here, and the second one being Defy Pain. And those are both going to come into play with how we're going to stack hands during the fight. Next, I'm going to be going through your traits and how they synergize with you keeping up regeneration and protection, which are your two main boons that are going to keep you alive throughout the fight. So the trait line choices are going to be synergizing with each of those. So first off, your Moa stance is going to be what's going to be granting you that protection. And the first trait that you're going to be utilizing is going to be Protective Ward, which just means that you're receiving less damage when you have protection up, and you're proccing protection when you take damage. Additionally, Companion's Defense allows you to proc additional protection if you were to dodge when you're merged with your pet. And then lastly, Rugged Growth gives you the opportunity to recover health when you're under the effects of protection, which you're going to be primarily throughout the entire fight. Again, you're going to use Moa Stance to proc regeneration as well. Your Warhorn can proc your regeneration, and your Heal skill can extend that regeneration. And then you're going to have additional traits that are also going to synergize with that. So you can gain regeneration when you're being struck below the threshold of 50%. And between being under 50% sometimes throughout the fight, using your Warhorn, your Moa Stance, and your Heal skill, you should always be under the effects of regeneration. And your trait that you're going to use for Oakheart Salve is that you're going to be also receiving additional damage reduction by 5% when you're under the effects of regeneration, which is going to be vital for keeping you alive when you're trying to stack those hands, as the damage is going to significantly ramp up. There's two main choices for gear, and so you can either use like the standard Healer's Harrier gear, which according to Snowcrow's guide, that's what it recommends. And when you're in pure Harrier's gear and you have no additional toughness from your gear, when you go into your beast mode and you are using Signet of Stone, the minimum amount of toughness you can have in this build is 1380. You'll see here that I have 1465 toughness because I'm utilizing this additional Cleric's Ring. It's just the only ascended one I had laying around. So mine's 1465, but really the key is just that you're getting additional toughness from your beast mode and your Signet of Stone, so you just need to be aware of what your toughness level is compared to your tanks in Deimos. So a safer way of handkiting, what I like to do if my tank has a lot of toughness, is I swap to Minstrel's Armor. I'm still using Harrier trinkets, and that one Cleric's Trinket, which puts me at 1822 toughness. I feel that this makes it a lot easier, especially if your group is missing some of the tears and adding additional damage in. But really the key takeaway here is just compare your toughness to your tank to make sure that you're not taking aggro from them. I touched on it briefly already, but the main ways that you're going to keep up your regeneration and your protection are going to be via your Warhorn and your Moa Stance, and then you're just going to extend that with your Heal as One skill. So basically, if you just use those skills off cooldown, you're going to maintain protection and regeneration without much trouble. But the nice thing about SoulBeast that makes it very safe is that you have two immunities with your pet, and you have an additional immunity with your Signet of Stone. And then next, you're using Greatsword over the recommended build of Longbow on the Snowcrow's website. Gives you the ability to block and stack hands a lot easier. And I really don't feel that you should be contributing that much damage anyway in most groups as a handkiter, so you're better off just stacking the hands correctly. Here I'm going to show a brief example of like what this mechanic is. And so at its core, these hands spawn at the furthest player away from Deimos when the boss fight begins, and they just ramp up damage. So if you didn't have someone at the edge here, then they would be dropping on the group and creating group-wide damage. So the handkiter is specifically trying to put them to the side. You'll see in this instance that this is an example of one hand. When they start to spawn, they spawn every 1 second for 5 seconds, so 5 hands spawn at a time. Typically as a kiter, you're trying to keep them along the edge of the platform, as you can see here. But if you were only to stack them one at a time, they would be spread everywhere, whereas your ideal scenario is to try and keep 5 of them stacked at once in these neat little piles. The best way to achieve that is this rotation I have on the left. So for the first set of hands, you can block it with your Greatsword, and then when the immunity comes out, or stand in the ward, and Saul yells quickly, you can use your Unending Resolve to protect yourself from dying to that mechanic. Then for the next set of hands, you can use your Greatsword block again. And then weapon swap. This is when you're going to refresh your boons, like I've talked about before, with your Warhorn, your Moa stance, and your heal. When you're in Warhorn, you're not going to have your Greatsword to block, so you can use either one of your immunities, like your pet immunity or your Signet of Stone. And then you're just going to weapon swap back to Greatsword when it's available and start this process over again. So you'll block a hand, use your immunity for stand in the ward, block a hand, weapon swap to keep your boons up. Now I'm going to go into an example of me doing this within a fight and talk through some ways of how I try to maintain that rotation, but times that I messed it up and why I made the choices that I did. So you can see these first hands, I blocked it with my Greatsword. Now we're going to have a ward come out. So as soon as he said quickly, I'm using my immunity to block that. And then I'm going to sidestep here, and I'm waiting for the cooldown on my Greatsword so that I can then block the next set of hands that come out. So blocking with my Greatsword. Now when I sidestep, I'm weapon swapping, refreshing my boons here. I have both my pet immunity and my Signet of Stone up, so I'm probably going to use one of those here to stack this set of 5. Now I'm restarting from the top of that rotation I showed before, of you're going to block this set with your Greatsword. The ward is going to come out. I'm going to use my immunity so that I don't die. You can see that the timing was a little off on this one, so now I'm having to sidestep a little bit because I didn't have my Greatsword block up. So if you don't have a block or immunity up, it's fine to not stack them perfectly in 5 hands. You're better off staying alive than you are trying to always stack it perfectly. So now I'm refreshing my boons. I'm waiting for my Moa stance and my heal to come up, and then I'm going to use my Signet of Stone in order to keep my immunity here, just because my pet one wasn't available yet. So you can see it's just a matter of, like, you try your best to stick to this rotation of using your Greatsword, your unflinching resolve when the immunity's coming out with the horde, and then going back to your Greatsword, weapon swap, you keep your boons up, and then you just use whatever's available. Like there, you saw I used my pet immunity while I was still in my Greatsword. It's because those hands were still ticking a little bit after the immunity in the center of the platform, and so I just wanted to make sure I stayed alive. So here, I'm now getting back on track with my Greatsword ability. This is a good example, too, of like the group has been kiting closer and closer towards me throughout this process, and I want to make sure I stay as far away from them as possible. So rather than continuing to keep a tight stack of hands on the edge of the platform, I chose to make a second row of them here, so I'm just staying far away from the boss to make sure that the hands are still going on me. Because yes, this is taking up a little more room on the platform in this side, but as long as I'm far away from the party, making sure that the hands aren't on the party is the most important thing, not necessarily it being pretty. And then so now once the group has gone down and brought Saul back up and they're transitioning for the next mechanic, it creates a situation where all those were cleared off the platform, and now I can start making my neat little stack on the outer edge again. So I really wanted to show this video of me utilizing this in the pug just to showcase, like, it's not always going to go exactly to plan like I wanted it to, as far as doing my perfect, like, Greatsword, unflinching Greatsword, weapon swap rotation. And a lot of times I'm not able to make sure that every single time I have 5. So it's just one of those where the biggest thing that's going to take some getting used to when you start hand kiting is creating scenarios in which you're just trusting and you know that when you're in a situation where there's going to be hands under you, or when there's going to be a situation where you need to stack under the ward, you've got 3 immunity choices and you got that Greatsword block.